Alphabet. In Module 2, we'll be exploring the lowercase alphabet. Everything that you've learnt in Module 1 will now come into play because each of the letters that you have to write in the lowercase are created using those basic strokes. The only ones that are slightly different are the R, the S, the V and the X, where they don't quite fit into the same patterns as the basic strokes. But of course you can spend a little bit more time practicing those and that will start making sense to you as well. So grab your pen and ink, get yourself in a really nice comfy position, so facing forward, feet flat on the floor, making sure that you're not hunching over your work as well, and time to get started. Let's get started with the letter A. This one is a C shape followed by an underturn. So we're not thinking of it as an A, we're thinking of it as two separate basic strokes that we put together to make it look like a letter A. So unlike in cursive where we would keep our nib on the paper at this point, we just lift off to do the second stroke, and that just keeps it really nice and clean. So I'll do one more of those. A C shape followed by an underturn, and that's it. Okay, the B is an ascending stem loop followed by a backward C shape. So do two strokes together, the ascending stem loop followed by a reverse C shape or a backward C shape. And if you were to link this one to another letter to make a word, you would just have a little line coming out thus. There you go. That's your B. Now the C, obviously you've been practicing already from last week, so I think hopefully you're starting to gain a bit of muscle memory on this one, and it'll hopefully not be too difficult for you to achieve. Okay, so again, taking it nice and slowly, starting a third of the way from the top, ending a third of the way from the bottom. There we go. C. Okay, so the D is just a C shape followed by an ascending stem loop. Becomes an underturn, and that's your connection to the next letter. Oops. If you ever make a little bit of a mistake or it doesn't quite look right, you can go back and just fill bits in a little bit. Oh dear, look, I did the ascending stem loop first. There we go, that's better. I guess if I did that first by accident, I could always go back and draw that in afterwards, but no. Definitely don't do the ascending stem loop first. There we go. There we go. So one more of those. So a C shape and an ascending stem loop, and then back up again at the end. The E shape is a little bit challenging. Because we've got to get the angle that the horizontal line comes out at. So You really do need to start horizontally before you go up and then back round, remembering to put that pressure on your downstroke. There we go. So horizontally and down and back up again. So it looks quite simple, but it just takes a little bit of practice to get, you know, get where you need to start it and going out horizontally and across, around, so it's just above halfway, I would say. Oops. So I'll go back and fill that little bit in there to complete the stroke. You'll find those little things will probably happen quite often when you're writing. And part of the skill of calligraphy is also knowing how to slightly adapt things and make things work a bit better. So for example, when I did my ascending stem loop first and came back to that bit, I could just continue that through. It goes a bit further below the line, but at the same time we could argue that that was a bouncing letter, which you'll learn about in one of the later modules. So, you know, just have a think of how you can adapt things if you make a small mistake as well. And I will show you later on down the line how you can correct some minor errors so that you don't have to write things out completely from the start again. Okay, so the F is an ascending stem loop followed by a reverse descending stem loop, all in the same movement. So this is quite a big letter, and sometimes new calligraphers find it a little bit difficult to have the full range of movement to get all the way down to the bottom. So if you're struggling a little bit, just don't go quite as high up, don't go quite as low down, and then just build it up over time. Muscle memory is quite an impressive thing, really. If you keep doing something for long enough, it'll start to feel more natural, and then you'll get to the point where you won't remember how or why you're doing it. It just happens. There we go. So one more ascending stem loop all the way down to the bottom, back up, and then a little flick, and that's going to be your connection to your next letter. And then the G, a C shape, and then a descending stem loop, and then lift your nib off and put it back down to do the connecting stroke, or you will find that you drag too much ink onto that connecting stroke and it'll just look a bit thick and a bit out of place. So lift the nib here and then put it back down to do the connecting stroke. So I'll show you that again. C shape all the way around, nib off, and then back down to do your connecting stroke. Let's do that one more time. Don't forget that you can rewind this tape as my tape, because it's a bit old-fashioned. You can rewind this video as many times as you need. So if there's a letter that's really nagging that you just don't feel that you quite got yet, do go back and have another look at it. And practice makes perfect. So onto the second page, we've got our H. So nice slow ascending stem loop, nib off, and then up and down and back up again for a compound curve. And again, nice slow ascending stem loop, and a nice slow compound curve. And bring the connecting stroke out at the end. There we go. The eye is lovely. It's nice easy one, this one. So it's just an underturn and a dot on the top. Now the dot on the top is actually called a tittle, and there's a couple of ways that you can do these. So if you were to just do a normal dot like you would with normal cursive writing, it would just look a bit lost and a bit small, so you do have to kind of just do a bit more of a circle and fill it in, or you can do it as a little tick, and I tend to do it more like a little tick, so it's almost like an upside down teardrop. It looks quite elegant. Okay, a J, which is just the descending stem loop, and then we lift off to do the connecting stroke, and then the little tittle on top, lift back down for the connecting stroke, and a tittle. And do one more of those because they're pretty straightforward. There we go, and on to the K. I quite like the K. The K is a nice, pretty letter. Ascending stem loop, and then the kick of the K goes down, and then it comes back down and round. It might take a little while to get the angle of the K sorted. There we go. But just keep practicing it, and it'll get better and better the more you do it. And just, if it's not quite the right angle, go back to tracing it a couple of times. Sometimes tracing it just makes it a little bit easier to achieve the same shape, and then you can go back and freehand it again afterwards. But don't ever be afraid of going back and trying something again. And if you're really struggling at this stage and finding this really difficult to do, go back to the basic strokes video and have another look at that. There's no shame in going back. So the L shape we've already done quite a bit last module, so hopefully we're starting again. Oh, there we go. Just clean my nib a little bit. Whatever you do, if you're doing calligraphy with a cup of tea or a glass of wine or a gin and tonic, don't dip your nib in it. I've done that once or twice and it's very upsetting. Just a word from the wise. Okay, so the L shape starts a little bit further down than the ascending stem loop, and then round and is a bit curved on that downstroke. There we go, lovely. On to the M, so we're halfway through now. So this is a series of overturns, but for each one you're going to lift off before you go back on again. Otherwise you're going to drag lots of ink out and it's going to become all thick and horrible. So lift your nib there, back on and over and again. I'll do that another time. So the lifting off is a really important thing. The other thing that's quite important is making sure the gap between these two parts is as close to the same as you can possibly make it. And over time, again, that'll get easier to do, but try and make sure that the gap is consistent throughout. Okay, we'll go on to the N, which is the same as the M, but one fewer overturn. Okay. There we go. One more. There we go. And then the O, I'm hoping you're fairly confident with now, because we have already done, oh dear. So that was one of those moments where I've not quite scraped off enough ink from my nib. So just a reminder again, scrape the top, scrape the bottom. And if you've not done it enough, that can happen where it just all blobs out. It's real pain, especially if you're quite far down somewhere, quite far down a piece of work, and that happens because you have to start it again, unfortunately. But yeah, there you go, that's a little bit better. So just, I think basically make sure you take your time and make a real effort to make sure that you've not got too much ink on your nib. As soon as you lose concentration, it's a lot easier to make those kinds of mistakes. There we go. So remembering to bring our loop quite far over to the left to kind of complete that O shape so it looks legible. There we go. I'll do one more of those and we'll carry on. Right, so just remember not to put this sheet directly on top of the last sheet, or you will end up with all of your ink smudging everywhere, and we don't need that. So yeah, so just make sure they're sitting side by side. Make sure you've got plenty of space where you're working to put everything out. Okay, so your P is a descending stem loop followed by a reverse C shape. Do that one again. Descending stem loop, lift off, backward C shape. Up until that point, it's exactly the same as the letter J. So again, using the concept of basic shapes rather than thinking of it as a whole letter really helps you to build consistency between your letters. So each of your downstrokes should look the same as each other, and the same with each of your strokes. So every time you do a C shape, it should look the same, etc., etc. Which isn't massively easy to achieve, but that's what you're aiming for. And over time, they definitely get closer to being more consistent. Okay, so the Q is a C shape. So really focus on your C shape. And then you're concentrating on doing a reverse descending stem loop. And lift, and then back out again. And remember that lift is really important, because we don't want to make our thick downstroke ink drag across and ruin your thin line. There we go. So do one more. There we go. So the R is a little bit tricky. Unlike cursive, where an R kind of comes out to the side and back down again, this one is sort of cascading down. So we go up, then we lift off, and then we cascade down with a bit less pressure in the middle than we have on this stroke and this stroke. So we kind of change the pressure we're putting on the nib as we're going down. Bit difficult, but just keep practicing, and I can guarantee it'll be one of your favourite letters by the time you're done with it. There we go. Love that one. Make sure that you keep referring back to the picture of the first one to remind you of the shape that you're aiming for as you're going along. Okay, I've got a bit of an ink smudge there. There we go. So the S is a little bit complicated like the R, because it doesn't really follow the basic strokes in the same way as the other letters. Okay, so we're kind of, it's quite a continuous one here. Lift off at the top, Then we go all the way round, but remember to pick our pen up before we carry it on. And then this exit stroke that comes out the other side could end up going up or further down depending on which letter comes next. So that's something to bear in mind. So again, look at the example to help you to know how to form the correct shape each time for that S. Keep practicing that one, and over time it'll get better and better. T is pretty simple, it's a bit like the I, but remember to lift off when you're crossing the T. So that you don't let it drag through. And what you can actually do with this one is, over time, we'll look at flourishing and we'll look at how we can adjust the T by changing how we cross it, and that'll just change the style a little bit, so that will come in a later module. The U is easy peasy, it's just 2 underturns, so I don't think we need to worry about that one too much. Just make sure that your first underturn comes all the way up to halfway up the X height before you do the second one, and that's how we get this nice sort of lift there on the letter U. That's quite nice and stylish. Okay, the V, you will need to just move your nib angle slightly to do the down stroke, and then just move it back again before you come back up, and then it flicks out. And that flick out there is the connecting stroke. So it depends what you're connecting to as to whether it comes out here or it might come out here. But however it comes out, it needs to be curved. So instead of going straight across, we'll curve it under, and that just makes it a bit prettier. Like that. Okay. And usually when I write a V, I normally do a loop. So if you're feeling a bit risque, go for a loop. And the W, very similar, 2 underturns and another connecting stroke that curves out. That one's a pretty easy one. There we go. Again, try not to cover your other pieces of writing. Don't forget to give your nib a bit of a clean here and there. Make sure that you've not got too much of the charcoal residue from the Sumi ink all over your nib, as it will just make it a lot less smooth, making it hard for yourself, and we don't want that. So the X, again like the V, it goes slightly against the typical angle that we use, so we might want to move our hand a little bit. And then this stroke is a downstroke, but it's a very, very light one. There we go. So a very light downstroke, and another one again. The angles that these go down on can sometimes prove a bit tricky when you're first starting out. So just practice it a few times and be kind to yourself. If it's not going right straight away, just step away for a minute, try a different letter, or go and get yourself another cup of tea and then come back to it. But that is often one of the ones that boggles people slightly. Yeah, so the Y is an underturn followed by a descending stem loop. So that one's pretty straightforward, as long as we remember to come halfway up the X height to connect to the second stroke. There we go. And bring it out, remembering to lift before we go over that thick line. And then the Z. So talk about leaving the best till last. This one's a pretty tricky one. It's kind of 2 overturns that are on a diagonal that's the opposite to the one that you've normally been using, followed by instantly a descending stem loop. So it's pretty tough. Don't be hard on yourself if you can't get this one straight away. I'm still not always overly happy with my Zs. Sometimes I have to give them a couple of tries. You know, and equally, even when you've been doing calligraphy for a while and you're working professionally, going back to some basic practice is absolutely essential to keep those muscles working in the way that they should be. So overturn, and then a second overturn, it becomes a descending stem loop. Try that one more time. So overturn, overturn, descending stem loop, back round. And there you go. So, well done. Make sure that if there's any letters you're not sure about, like I said before, go back and have another go. Practice over them a few times. Rewind that particular letter as many times as you feel that you need to get it right. If you're really struggling with any part of it and you want a little bit more help, let me know. That's absolutely fine as well. And I look forward to joining you again at module 3, when you'll be learning all about capital letters. Now that's a whole different ball game. Enjoy.